Welcome back. Doing another response video, another topic that somebody has asked a question about, and going to try and do my best to give you guys an answer. And this is directed towards mainly somebody who might be coming to Prime, or somebody who is a truck driving school student or thinking about becoming a truck driver. And the question had to do with can you talk about the tanker endorsement? And really there's not a ton to talk about in terms of the tanker endorsement. So what I wanted to do is do an entire video on endorsements and restrictions on your CDL, because they kind of go hand in hand. And I think there's also a little bit of confusion about what is an endorsement and what is a restriction. First of all, let's talk about endorsements. Endorsements, probably the most common endorsement out there is going to be that motorcycle endorsement. I'm sure more people have a motorcycle endorsement than any other endorsement, and that obviously has nothing to do with a CDL, but that is an endorsement. And so to describe what an endorsement is, if you imagine you have your regular driver's license, if you want to do something that is above and beyond driving a car, or something slightly different from driving a car, that's when you get endorsements involved. And we could go off on a complete tangent about how really I think there should be an RV endorsement, which would be a large recreational vehicle endorsement. I think that should be an endorsement. Personally, I don't think someone who has never had any course since they were 16 years old, been driving for 50 years, all of a sudden you retire, you're 65, 66 years old, you should be able to just hop behind the wheel of a large recreational vehicle and just go out. I think you should have to get a RV endorsement. There is no endorsement on your personal license for pulling a trailer. That's another one that personally I wouldn't be against, pulling a trailer being an endorsement on a regular license. But those aren't there. On a regular license, a motorcycle is really the only endorsement that you have. On a commercial vehicle, there are several. And my philosophy is to have as many endorsements as you can. Now, there's one exception to that, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But my license, I have a school bus endorsement, I have a passenger endorsement, and those I obviously got when I drove school bus and when I drove charter buses and things like that. There's a couple of special circumstances with endorsements, and a motorcycle would be one, a school bus would be another, where you have to drive that particular vehicle while you are taking your CDL test. Motorcycle, obviously you have to ride a motorcycle, you have to pass an on-road test, and you're on a motorcycle in order to get a motorcycle endorsement. School bus, you need to be driving a school bus in order to get a school bus endorsement. There's one restriction we'll talk about a little bit later, that you have to be driving a vehicle that is equipped with a particular piece of equipment in order to not have that restriction. There's actually two of those we'll talk about in a little bit. You do not, however, need to be driving a bus to have a passenger endorsement. You do not need to be driving a combination vehicle to have that doubles, triples. I shouldn't say combination vehicle. You don't have to be driving a double or triple to have the doubles or triples endorsement. You don't need to test in a tank vehicle to have the tanker endorsement, and you don't need to have a hazmat vehicle to have the hazmat endorsement. Personally, I have all of those endorsements. I have a motorcycle, I have all the other endorsements. I do not, however, have a hazmat endorsement, and this is the one exception that I'm going to make to you. Now, this is the Indiana CDL manual. I have this one because I happen to currently reside in the state of Indiana. I'm going to put a link in the description of this video to all of the endorsements and all of the restrictions, and it talks about them. There are some discrepancies between states. They are very minor. For whatever reason, even though licenses are in Indiana, if you have a regular driver's license and a motorcycle endorsement, that's going to be accepted in every other state in the country. If you have a CDL and you have a restriction, that is going to be accepted in every other state in the country. But not everyone uses the same letters, and that's what an endorsement is you'll have under endorsements, you'll have a letter, P for passenger, S for school bus, N for tanker, T for doubles and triples. Why they didn't do T for tanker and D for doubles, I have no idea. H for hazmat, and then X is tanker and hazmat combined. Again, why they didn't just leave well enough alone and let you have an N and a H and assume that you have a hazmat and a tanker. It's the government. I don't have an answer for you. So I'll put a link in the description to those, and then there's a whole other set of letters for your restrictions. So again, we'll get back to the restrictions momentarily. I personally have every endorsement on that list. I do not have the X endorsement. Obviously, that means I don't have the H endorsement for hazmat. There's a reason for that. Hazmat endorsement requires you to pay Homeland Security to do a background check. You have to submit fingerprints. It is around $95 every time you renew your license. You have to do all that. Then you have to go and you have to pass the written test. You have to keep up with that just like you do all these other endorsements. I never haul hazmat. Prime does not haul hazmat on the tanker side. We are all food grade. I've talked about that in the past. I ran a canola oil load earlier. Tomorrow I've got a soybean oil load. 90% of what I do is canola or soybean oil. I may do some palm oil. There's no point in me spending $100, even if it's only every other 3 years, 4 years, whenever my license comes up for renewal. I just don't see the point of spending $100 for something that I'm not going to use. If I need a hazmat endorsement, I can go ahead and get that taken care of at that particular time. But that's the only, and if you're coming to Prime, a lot of people will say, well, should I take, and I know we've talked about taking those permit tests before you get to Prime and transferring them to Missouri. Hazmat is the one that does not transfer between states. And that background check is the reason why. Because when you go through Homeland Security, they're going to do a background check, and if you change residency, and that's part of what going to Prime is you establish temporary residency in Missouri, they're going to have another address where they're going to have to run a background check. And then you're going to move back to your and reestablish residency back in your home state. And so let's say you take your permit test and you take your hazmat endorsement, you pay the Homeland Security fee, you pay your $95, you live in Indiana, and you get the hazmat certificate on your CDL permit. Now you go to Missouri. They're not going to transfer that. If you want your CDL with a hazmat permit, you're going to need to reapply in Missouri, pay another $95. You're only going to have your CDL in Missouri for a couple of months. You'll have your permit for a month or so, maybe. Then you're going to have it on your driver's license, your CDL. You'll have that for maybe a month. You get routed back to Indiana, let's say. And then you'll have to pay another $95, retake the hazmat test, and get your hazmat endorsement. So the advice there is, if you want your hazmat endorsement, do everything else. And again, you can take the passenger endorsement. Again, you can't take the school bus endorsement unless you plan to take a road test in a school bus. You can take the tanker, you can take the doubles and triple, you can take all of those endorsements. And then when you transfer your license finally back to your home state, then you can apply for the fee, the background check, take your written test, and then you can do it and only pay that fee one time. So there's your endorsements. Restrictions are another thing, and you may notice that I didn't mention air brakes. If you go through your CDL knowledge book, let's see if I can bring this up, you'll notice there's 10 sections on there. If you've started to study, you may know some of these things. Sections 1 through 3 is what the general knowledge test is. The general knowledge is your basic. You take that, you're going to get a CDL permit. You need to take, in addition, test section 6 for combination vehicles. If you take just the general knowledge test, you're going to get a permit for a Class B or Class C or Class D, whatever you indicate you want to get for your CDL permit. If you want a Class A CDL, which is what you need to drive a semi, a combination vehicle, tractor and trailer, you need to take section 6, which is combination vehicles. If you want the passenger endorsement, you need section 4. If you want the double and triple endorsement, you need section 7. If you want the tanker endorsement, that's section 8. School buses is section 10, and I skipped over Hazmat, which is section 9, which again I would suggest that you go back to after you've done everything. You'll also note that I skipped over section 5. Section 5 is air brakes, and section 5 is not an endorsement. Air brakes are a restriction, and what that means is you need to pass the air brake test. But if you don't have that test passed, or if you say, I'm just not going to bother with that, first of all, you're not going to be able to take your road test in a vehicle that is equipped with air brakes. You can go and take your test in a Ford F-350, put a ton of weight on a trailer. You're going to get over 36,000 pounds. If you load enough weight on the trailer, you're going to be over 36,000 pounds, which is what a Class A CDL is. 36,000 pounds on a combination vehicle. And that'll be an automatic transmission truck, and we'll get to that in a second as well. But if that vehicle is just your standard F-350 with a lot of weight on a trailer, you can go and take a CDL test in that vehicle. But it doesn't have air brakes, and you will have a restriction on your CDL that says you cannot drive any CDL that has air brakes. If that is a automatic transmission F-350, you will have another restriction on your CDL that says you can drive only automatic transmission commercial motor vehicles and only commercial motor vehicles with no air brakes. There are a number of other restrictions. Another one, and probably the most common restriction, is you have to drive with prescription glasses. So there are restrictions that you're probably familiar with or are on regular driver's licenses. But there are more, and there's a whole list of them, and you'll see that. And again, I'll put the Indiana website in the description to this video about what all the restrictions are. There's some goofy ones, and I actually have kind of a goofy one on my license. I have, as noted, a passenger and a school bus endorsement. But I have the restriction, I don't remember it off the top of my head, but it's on the website, that I cannot drive any Class A school buses or Class A passenger vehicles. I'm not positive which one it is. Passenger vehicle, by the way, is defined as over 16, carrying 16 passengers. So that's not saying I can't have somebody ride in the passenger seat. Doesn't mean I can't have one in the bunk and one in the passenger seat. They're talking about a bus situation, 16 people. And the reason that happened was when I transferred my license at that time from Michigan to Missouri. Missouri forgot to put my school bus endorsement on my CDL permit. So when I tested and upgraded my CDL from a Class B to a Class A, I didn't upgrade my school bus endorsement to a Class A. So there's some goofy restrictions that are on that particular list. As far as the tests, General knowledge is the most in-depth of all of the tests that you're going to take. The rest of them are relatively easy. I tend to find or hear that people have the most trouble with the air brake. It's the most technical of the written tests. People tend to have the easiest time with the tanker endorsement. It's very straightforward. The hazmat one, again, is somewhat technical, somewhat memorization oriented. And I realize for people that haven't studied perhaps in years since you left high school, it can be difficult to get back into the habit or used to studying for written tests. For me, I read the chapters. I read it a second time. I read it a third time. And then I sat in the parking lot of the DMV, BMV, whatever your state calls it, and I skimmed it one last time. So I read through each section thoroughly 3 times. Not speed read, not, okay, I'm going to read through this, go back and read through this, go back and read through this. I found that if I read it, went away from it for an hour, read it again, went away from it for an hour or two, read it a third time, and then I just perused it. There are test questions at the end of each section. Just happen to turn to section 3. Section 3, test your knowledge. Pay attention to the questions, and it's not important what the questions are. Pay attention to those test questions. The other thing, if you're having problem, there are test exams online. Take those until you pass them 100% every time. If there's a particular test that you just can't pass, you just can't seem to remember things, that would be my biggest suggestion. Use those online tests. A lot of them are free, and that would be the way to study for those particular tests. But there you go. There's the difference between endorsements and restrictions on your CDL, and some comments on the individual endorsements and the tests that you're going to take. Again, I know that there's a lot of us who have not taken written tests. For me, I was in my late 30s when I started doing this, so I hadn't taken written tests on the high school side in probably 20 years almost. I did do some college for 3 years, but still, it had been almost 20 years since I had taken written tests of any kind. My daughter found it funny that I had to study for tests, but they're not that difficult. Like I said, really, I think the air brake one is the most technical, the most oriented to memorization. Hazmat, and again, that's something you don't, at the very minimum, if you do what I suggest, get everything taken care of, pass your CDL test, get your license, transfer it back to your home state. At that point, you only have to worry about the hazmat test. You won't have all these other tests you'll have to worry about, so it should be a little bit easier for you at that point. Sorry for the length of this one. It did get a little long, but a lot of information in there. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you found it helpful. If you are coming to Prime or thinking about it, click on the link in the description. It'll take you right to the application. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you next time.